Go to any playground where children are playing and you'll eventually hear someone yell, "Hey, that's not fair." Our whole country has been yelling that for, well, pretty much its whole existence, from before we were a country. Taxation without representation is just the first part of the sentence. The rest of it's implied. Taxation without representation is not fair. After you get past the lofty opening paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it gets pretty boring, as Jefferson and Franklin list all the grievances the colonies had against the crown, injustices suffered, each of which could have ended with, "That's not fair." So it's not just children in schoolyards, it's men and women in state houses and courtrooms, protesters in the street and on Facebook, family members in hospitals and in cemeteries. It's not fair. Every time innocents are slaughtered in a mass shooting, whether it be school children in Connecticut, Florida, or in Amish, Pennsylvania, or worshipers in a Pittsburgh synagogue or an Episcopal church in a Birmingham suburb, we cry out a collective, "It's not fair." And one of the person who points out that, life isn't fair, that's acceptable to say when a child complains that their younger brother's scoop of ice cream is larger than theirs, but to say it to the grieving wife, mother, son, or father is just callously cruel. And life isn't fair, true though it may be, is often used as an excuse to do nothing, to accept injustice as just a part of life, so deal with it. When in fact, it seems that no one wants to actually deal with it because it's too expensive or inconvenient or doesn't directly impact those who have the power to actually do something about it. But the cry to do something is universal, and it comes from the same place. Deep in each human heart is a voice that says, "This isn't right. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Violence and injustice should not have the upper hand. There has to be a better way." New Testament scholar N.T. Wright has said, "A sense of justice comes with the kit of being human." That voice is the same voice that comes out of the pages of the Bible. It begins quietly, but by the time we reach the books of the prophets, the voice gets louder and louder. The voice of God through those wild-eyed, visionary, peace-hungry prophets went something like this: "You were made for better days. The strong oppress the weak, the rich pummel the poor, nation goes to war against nation, but I, the Lord, have made you for better days, and I will bring those better days to pass." The ancient Jews had a word to describe those better days. They called Shalom, Hebrew for peace. In the Bible, God's peace, Shalom, meant much more than simply the absence of war. It indicated more than a positive state in my soul or a private transaction between me and God. The longing for Shalom included those things, but for those radical Jewish believers, the prophets, peace was much bigger and broader. Shalom meant not only inner peace or spiritual peace, it meant wholeness and completeness through all creation. It meant the end of injustice. It meant the rich would no longer devour the poor. It meant all brokenness would be set right and healed. It meant that people would love one another. Shalom would flow deep and broad, embracing all creation, including plants and animals, the whole earth itself. The prophet Micah lived about 700 years before Jesus was born in a mid-sized town called Moresheth, about 25 miles south of Jerusalem. Like the other prophets, Micah saw things that everyone else wanted to ignore. In chapter 1, it's idolatry, which we need to understand is it involved the exploitation of unprotected women and children, those not attached to the protection of a man's household, specifically widows and orphans. That's part of the injustice of idolatry. In chapter 2, it's the rich stealing land from the poor, often legally, because when you make the laws, you can make sure that you can steal lawfully. In chapter 3, it's the rulers and leaders who use their position to enrich themselves at the expense of the people. In chapter 4, it's dishonest merchants who cheat the poor. In each chapter, Micah mentions some form of injustice perpetrated by the wealthy and the powerful of Israel on its weakest citizens. Not only did this injustice outrage Micah, it also connected him once again with those ancient promises of better days. In chapter 4, we read, "In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills. Peoples shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines, and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken." This is just a beautiful picture of deep and rich and wide shalom. And perhaps, when we were young, we idealistically longed for these kind of better days, when we were 13 or 15 or 23. But then we became adults and got busy and settled into real life. And who has time to dream about better days when we're not sure how we're going to make it through this day? We have bills to pay and kids to drive and term papers to finish and health problems to resolve and retirement plans to build. The list of responsibilities goes on and on. Longing for peace, longing for justice, aching for better days. We just don't have the time or energy anymore. Besides, these promises were for Israel, for people long ago, for a time different than our own. Some fantasy stories begin almost exactly like that, don't they? A long, long time ago in a land far, far away. When we hear that, we say to ourselves, well, this never happened and it never will. Swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks, nations at peace with one another, no one learning the art of war anymore because it's just not needed. Yeah, right. Dream on. This isn't how it is in the real world, and it never will be. And then December rolls around and trees go up in our houses and lights go on and presents are bought. A Christmas Story and It's a Wonderful Life are played on continuous loops and our kids get their pictures made with Santa Claus. And something else happens. We hear again the voice of the prophet Micah. Micah, that little book in the back of the Old Testament that most of us ignore the rest of the year. We listen to him again as he speaks to us, this time from chapter 5, verses 2 through 5. "But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, you who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth. And then the rest of the kindred shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall live secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be the one of peace." The Lord who comes in chapter 4 to teach peace and help us unlearn war, it is now revealed he will come to us in the form of a man, but not just a man, for his origin is from old. Later, the prophet Daniel would call God the Ancient One. Daniel kind of got it. This was no mere man. This ruler would be different from all the others who came before. And Micah got it too. Israel's human rulers were corrupt and weak. Micah 5:1 describes a king being publicly humiliated. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek. In verse 3, the prophet describes a time when the nation would be conquered, divided, and sent into exile. Micah compares these days of abandonment and groaning to a woman's groaning during childbirth. Yet, into this violent and seemingly hopeless situation, God will send his peace bearer. But look carefully, Micah warns, or you might miss his coming. When God brings peace, he will do so quietly that you just might miss it. That's the way God's shalom comes. Not with a marching band and hoopla and press coverage, but quietly and to unlikely people. In Isaiah 11, God told us that the Messiah would come like a branch growing out of a dead stump. From death and decay, the peace bringer would arise. Now Micah tells us in the second verse that the coming one, the Messiah, will come from a very quiet place, Bethlehem. Bethlehem literally means house of bread, and it was a small, insignificant town. Though he comes from an insignificant place, he is nevertheless God's peace giver. Verse 4 tells us, he will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. How big and broad and all-encompassing God's shalom is. And then finally, Micah says, and he will be their peace. This promised shalom is wrapped up in a person. This reality that we're aching and longing for, that seems always out of reach, has come, and it's wrapped up in a person. And who is it? Well, Micah doesn't know. He knows God's shalom is big and beautiful and real, and he knows it will come through someone sent by God, but it will have to wait until Christmas. 700 years later, as is recorded in our New Testament, there's a story about a strange birth. Someone is born, and the clues begin to point in the same direction. Just as Micah predicted, this peace bringer comes from Bethlehem. Another witness proclaims the following about the coming one. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. And when he comes, an entire host of angels start singing, glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to all whom God favors. Could it be? Is this the one all the clues were pointing to? Around the globe this Christmas, followers of Jesus will celebrate the coming of the peace God intended for his creation, once lost because of injustice and longed for by all of creation. It has come in Jesus. He's the one Micah pronounced, who would be our peace, our shalom. And he's the one who said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Notice he didn't say they shall become children of God, as if peacemaking is a means of becoming a child of God. It's actually in the passive voice, so someone else is calling them children of God. Another way of saying it is that the people recognize the children of God as the ones making peace. That's how you know who's a child of God. They're the peacemakers. When you go about making peace in the world, whether it be at your work or school or community or family or the world, you're showing the world that you are a child of God, a child of the one who created the world in peace and redeemed the world through the peace of the cross, and who is renewing all creation by spreading peace on earth and goodwill among people. You may not realize that's what you're doing. You may not even recognize it in yourself, but you are a child of God. And as followers of Jesus, we're now called to announce the good news that others can be reconciled to God and to others as well, even our enemies, especially our enemies. We begin this peacemaking journey in our homes, neighborhoods, and families. And peace doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means working through the conflict to bring peace into our relationships. We stand up for those who are treated with injustice. We ask for Messiah to bring his peace into our city and community. Being a peacemaker under Messiah's reign also propels us to live in hope. By ourselves, left to our own devices, we can never finish the job of peacemaking. We build programs and institutions and hospitals and schools. We start movements and initiatives, but they tend to run down or even grow corrupt sometimes. All our efforts are partial at best. At worst, they're deeply flawed, filled with our own ego and unmet needs. But Jesus promises to finish the job because God has a plan. God will bring his peace. But you have to believe in God and in his plan. You can't call yourself a believer in Jesus and not believe in his plan. You can't say you believe in Jesus but consider this swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks, not learning war stuff, fairy tales of long, long ago in a land far, far away. You have to believe that it is real and in a time that is coming soon and in the world that we live in. The call from Jesus to be a peacemaker is full of hope. God doesn't call the perfect and unbroken to be his peacemakers. Isaiah chapter 4 verses 6 and 7 says that God chooses the lame and the outcast. The Messiah brings shalom to the earth, and he calls us to join him, but doesn't call the perfect. He calls the wounded, those with the limp. And that's good news, because we're all lifelong limpers. I pray this Christmas season that you will know the peace of God and hear God's call on your life to be a peacemaker and thus be recognized as a child of God. Lord, pain and suffering, sickness and suffering, conflicts and wars all occur all year long and every month. But when they happen in December during the season of Christmas, when we sing of peace on earth, well, we're confronted with how foreign these things are. They are common, all too common, but they're out of place, because we know this is not how you created things to be and not what you created us to be. And there is a longing in us for shalom. Let us never give up or become dull to that longing, for in that longing is hope. And in that hope is room for faith to believe what we hope for, what we long for, that it will one day come to pass. May we be ever committed to the Prince of Peace and join him in the task of peacemaking, so that love and faith and hope have the last word as your kingdom reigns forever. Amen.